you're going to have to bear with me tonight. My allergies have really picked up in the last 24 hours, but I'm going to go ahead and call this Saline City Council work meeting to order at 6 p.m. on October the 7th. Members present this evening are myself, Mayor Morrow, Council members Gearbaugh, CO, McClellan, Dillon, and Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. I did receive a text message about an hour ago from our colleague, Ms. Mitchell. She is under the weather and will be unable to attend both the work and regular meeting. So she will be absent. From staff, we have City Manager Campbell, Clerk Royal, Treasurer Bennett, DPW Director Fordyce, Wastewater Treatment and Superintendent Wygowski is here. Steve, welcome. And we also have Deputy Treasurer McDonough. The rest of you who are in the audience this evening, we welcome you and encourage you to sign in the back, on the back table to my left. We also welcome Brian Rubel from Tetra Tech, who will be taking the lead on the SAW project review. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the agenda as submitted unless there are amendments. So moved. As submitted, Councilwoman Dillon. Thank you, and that's seconded by Ms. McClellan. Is that correct? Thank you, ma'am. All those in favor of approving the agenda as submitted signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. Is there a motion to excuse the absence of our colleague, Kristen Mitchell? So moved. Moved by Councilmember Gearbaugh, seconded by Councilmember Seal. All those in favor of excusing the absence signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. We come now to public comments. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question on an item that appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments? There are no citizen comments. Then we'll proceed to the one discussion item of the evening, which is a review of the SAW grant initiative. Mr. Campbell, are there any obligatory remarks that you'd like to make this evening? No? Then I will turn it over to Mr. Rubel. You have a PowerPoint, I understand. In fact, not an understanding, I know you have a PowerPoint, excuse me. And I would also ask from staff if Mr. Wygowski and Mr. Fordyce would like to join Mr. Rubel up at here at the dais. That would be great because I anticipate a number of questions that you two gentlemen might be able to address when Mr. Rubel has concluded his remarks. So Brian, we welcome you here this evening, and the floor is yours. And yes, please make sure to speak into the microphone. Everyone, please be sure to speak into the microphone and make sure the green light is illuminated at the base before you speak. So begin with the presentation. When Brian is done, we'll entertain any remarks from staff members, and then we'll work our way around the table addressing any question concerns that my council colleagues have. Mr. Rubel.
Well, thank you, Mayor and Council. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. This is kind of the conclusion of a 3-year effort to do a asset management plan for your wastewater, including the sanitary sewer and the treatment plant, and stormwater systems through the what they call the SAW grant, what was formerly the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality granted the city of Saline just over $1 million to do this program.
Can I stop you there real quick? Because Mr. Gearbaugh actually posted something on Facebook this past week that I thought was very timely and important. Can you provide just a brief overview of the SAW grant, its relevance, and how important and fundamental that is to assessing and gauging the quality of our infrastructure?
Yes, and that's the whole purpose for that, that grant program is to help local government do these assessments of their wastewater and, in your case, stormwater infrastructure. I think the feeling at the state government was too few communities were doing that and keeping up with that and investing the proper amount of money and funds to keep those infrastructures current. So one of my slides up here will hint to that. They actually made those evaluations obligatory for the wastewater and the sanitary sewer systems, wrote it into your NPDES permit, which is your permit to operate your wastewater plant. But nice that they made a grant program eligible at the same time they did that to help defray those costs. So it's been quite a program. I believe 666 local governments in Michigan received funding for that. They did it in waves. They could not handle all 666 in one time period, so they staggered it by year through a lottery system. I believe Saline was in the 3rd wave of that, and there are others that are only a year or 2 in that were in the 4th and 5th wave. So the program ends. It was supposed to end this month. They extended that, I think, just through convenience to the end of the calendar year. People just seem to organize their lives around the calendar, so I think they gave everybody through the end of the year to wrap that up. So we have a couple of months here to kind of put the bow on things and tidy it up for you. So
Very good.
that leads us here. Ms. Bennett's volunteered to advance slides for me.
Here we
So
go.
Excellent.
I think I can handle
I can
this.
sit here and, very good. So, yeah, again, it's a plan to manage the assets, to, as it says, understand what assets you have, what the needs are, make sure that you have the proper funding in place, and make sure that the O&M is properly provided. It's a requirement of the permit, as I mentioned. The grant roughly is a 90% grant with a 10% local match. And it's important, this plan, you know, nobody's vision for 20 years is perfect. So it really is meant to be a living document. It's meant to be evaluated each year, updated, revised. So it's a snapshot in time, snapshot as we sit here in 2019. I think the near term is pretty visible. I think we've got a real good handle on that, but 15 to 20 years out, you know, that's really kind of a best guess at this point. So, and it really is, the way this is shook out, I really think it's kind of a minimum level of investment. A lot of this, Mr. Scull and I talked about at the plant, and there are other things and wish lists that could be added, but because this is a requirement of the state to do this, when Bob and I kind of laid this out originally, we didn't want to put too much in the plan that couldn't be implemented. We could always add to the plan in future years. The DEQ is going to look at this, and if you don't do certain things, that's going to be kind of a black mark. So it was kind of meant to be a minimum level. And I think that's what the next slide says too.
Well, maybe I can't handle this.
One of the arrows will do it, yeah. So more certainty in the next few years, a little bit cloudier vision as time goes on. The major elements of the plan includes from left to right an inventory. So we took a pretty good inventory of assets, both sewer systems and the wastewater treatment plant. And then we did a condition assessment of a sample. The grant would not require, would not fund a complete condition assessment of every foot of sewer pipe. So we had funding to do a sample. Level of service just defines goals and objectives for a utility. The business risk exposure is a way to prioritize and assess what's more critical than others. I have a slide on that coming up. A capital improvement plan was developed for the storm, sanitary, sewer, and the wastewater plant. We did a rate analysis, and actually you've already used the rate analysis with your spring budgeting. You actually used that data already. And of course it concluded with these final reports and other software and documentation. Quite a few records have been developed that will be of use to the city going forward. So this, I think it's important to kind of put a value on the system. In fact, it's a permit requirement that you have a value of your sanitary sewer system. And we estimated that's around $72 million for your sanitary sewer and your treatment plant combined. It's about $30 million for the sanitary sewer system. They're broken out into gravity mains, manholes, force mains, and pump stations, and those components. Sir?
I have a question. Gravity main, of course, means the old expression, stuff flows downhill, it's a gravity main. The force main, is that where you have to have a pump, that's what we're calling it?
Yes. So force mains flow uphill, yeah.
Okay,
Yep,
thank you.
great question. And the wastewater plant, we broke into, I think there's 13 different components of the plant, primarily by building or major process. We grouped, there's actually over 700 assets at your plant that we categorized, put them into those 13 elements, and that totaled about $41 million. So it's a very valuable asset you have on Monroe Street. And we did the same with the storm sewer system, including the sewers, manholes, the inlets, the catch basin type elements, and that totaled about $46 million. So as a preview, I'll come back to a summary of this later on. We did televising as a way to assess the condition of sewer systems is to run a TV camera through them to look at the condition of the pipe walls. We did about 9 miles of that, so almost from here to Clinton, we televised your sewer system. Last September, you heard me talk about the computer models that were developed for your storm and sanitary sewer system. So you have those developed. Those have already been valuable. We've assessed numerous petitions to connect to the systems with those models. They will continue to be valuable in the near future. We surveyed thousands of manholes. We surveyed, so we had precise coordinates of those. We've entered those coordinates into your GIS system. And 1,243 of those manholes, we inserted a three-dimensional TV camera into your manholes and I'll show you that in a second, some really helpful data on your manholes. And that data has been loaded into your GIS and is available to you as you proceed. We inspected 7 pump stations. You have 7 pump station and lift stations. All 7 of those were inspected and categorized as to their condition. And at the wastewater plant, we broke it into 737 distinct elements. And we have condition ratings of all of those in our records. This is that three-dimensional image of the manholes. And manholes come in various shapes, sizes, methods of construction. The ones on the left are precast manholes. That is, they're manufactured in a factory with concrete and brought in and then set down in the field. And that's why you see the smooth surface there. That's actually a 360-degree image kind of unwrapped from left to right. And not only is there an image of that, but there is a point cloud. A scanner was put in there to measure thousands of internal dimensions inside that manhole. So we can see defects and other important elements of that manhole. Pipes on the right side, you can see as that's unrolled, those circular elements are pipes. The reason the manholes are different from left to right, the one on the right is constructed of block, like a brick house, layer by layer. The block went up. It's probably an older type of construction, would be the one on the right. So you can see the one on the left, we can identify things like a leaky cover on that. We can see that little stain coming down from top to bottom. So that one has a little bit of a leak that we might want to rectify either now or maybe the next street construction project. We need to go in and seal that manhole. So that's the kind of things we can do with these images now that we have. Then sewers and manholes as well can be scored numerically based on their condition. There's a national standard to do that, and that was used for Saline, so that, you know, and they're on a 1 to 5 scale. So a 4 condition in Saline would be a 4 condition in Clinton or Tecumseh or Adrian, or it's a national standard. And just to give you a snapshot, 5 is the worst, 1 is the best. And usually when you get to about a 4 or 5, you want to be thinking about doing an improvement to repair that. 5 really means imminent failure. So was that about 7% of the manholes on the sanitary sewer rated 4 or higher. On the sewer, we had 19 defects that had a 4 or more. But all the rest of them are in pretty good shape. They're 3 or less, and those are things that you probably wouldn't repair for a number of years till they progress to the 4 or 5 level. On the storm, yeah.
19 out of how many?
Oh, boy, that's a great question. Thousands. Yeah, yeah.
Just on perspective.
Yep.
So, thank you.
The storm, again, we had about 8%, if my eyes are reading that correctly, 4 or higher for the manholes, and about 7 reaches of storm sewer that we thought probably are in that 4 and 5 range and should be addressed. And again, if it's not one of those 11, it's in pretty good shape. So I'm good with that. Thank you, Joe. Now on the wastewater, there really isn't a national standard. But we came up, we developed a 5-point scale that we've used in a number of communities, and so we applied that same scale to Saline's wastewater assets. And about 27 of the 737 that I referenced, we thought were in the 4 or 5 range. So it's pretty similar, I think. Get the 4 or 5, that's something you want to think about rehabilitating. So that's about 4% of the assets, the wastewater plant. Now, I spent a whole hour last September talking about the computer models for the sewer system, so I chose not to repeat lots of that due to time constraints tonight. But just to give you a snapshot of what we talked about, you do have those tools now that are available to the city to use. Not only are they a computer model, but in the case of the sanitary sewer system, they're calibrated to measurements. So we had flow meters there both in 2018 and 2019, I believe, where we measured over a dozen locations of flow. So it's not a theoretical model, it actually matches measurements. So it's more powerful than any kind of paper calculation we could do. We talked a lot about that the fall of last year. We looked at both existing and growth conditions, so we have those analyses available to us. And not much did change since we last talked about those models. They were in pretty good shape when we talked. The one thing that I mentioned we had planned to do, and we did do that this spring, is we didn't do many measurements originally on that central belt. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute, right through the downtown area. But when we did the first set of measurements, we had a suspicion that maybe that was at capacity too. So we had some surplus budget in the program, and we installed 3 more flow meters in the spring of this year, and then recalibrated that part of the model. And unfortunately, we confirmed what the first measurement showed us, is that we have some capacity challenges with that pipe as well. And I can show you briefly a little bit in the following slides. So this is a sanitary sewer system from north to south. Treatment plants kind of on the bottom off of Monroe. You have 3 major trunk sewers in Saline. We call them the West Belt, right along the Saline River and the pond, the Central Belt right through kind of the heart of downtown, and the East Belt more towards the Maple Avenue area. And what we learned from this actually is, again, you've known for a few decades, I think the West Belt had some capacity challenges, and unfortunately we confirmed that finding as well. The East Belt we talked quite a bit about last fall. Right kind of in the middle of the East Belt, right in the Michigan Avenue area, is a pinch point for the existing flow and for added flow. So part of the CIP is to do an improvement there. The southern part looked quite a bit better, Old Mill Drive and so forth. And then what we confirmed this spring is that Central Belt also is at capacity guidelines that the state of Michigan publishes. So I don't think you'll have a lot of new development to that Central Belt, but if you were to, that's something we have to be careful of.
And where are the pinch points?
Oops.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to see from this scale of a drawing. It's towards the downstream end of that Central Belt.
Is that the red lines?
You have to kind of really blow up that drawing to see it.
And if I may stick on that point for just a moment, would the fix be similar to what we will be doing in fiscal year, well, in the construction season of 2020 and 2021 to rectify a existing deficiency on the East Belt front line?
I do have a capital improvement on the Central Belt as well that I pushed out a few years in the schedule. I would suggest probably a preliminary step before investing in that is there's methods to look for wet weather impacts. Maybe a stray catch basin connected to sanitary, maybe downspouts from downtown buildings. That's a very common source of inflow. And I think that would be prudent to do that kind of a study on the Central Belt before you invested in a multi-million-dollar construction project. So there is a couple sentences about that in the report. I think I'm
Moving
good.
on. Okay.
The storm sewer remains exactly as we discussed last fall. We did show this This shows results for what we call a 5-year storm, a storm that occurs on average once every 5 years. When we ran a storm that occurs once every 10 years, which is kind of the design standard for storm sewers, we found a lot more problems that didn't have any evidence of the past occurring. So, and that's not uncommon for storm sewers because the water just runs downhill to the next catch piece. So it's not uncommon that sewers can be under capacity, the water just runs over land. The two areas that we talked about last fall, again, are on McKay on the west end and on Henry by the municipal parking lot. They're kind of low areas where water would pond if it doesn't have anywhere to run to. And again, I don't know of any complaints or concerns about these, so I certainly wouldn't recommend an improvement until perhaps maybe you're doing a street project and you might want to upsize the storm sewers.
Where on McKay, Mr. Rubel?
Towards the west end, that red dot is, towards the mill pond, is the low area on McKay.
Right.
So this is like the intersection of McKay and Lewis?
Between Lewis and Mills.
Okay, between Lewis and Mills, okay.
Again, this is not a calibrated model, and when I talked to staff, historically, there had not been any complaints or concerns, so I would not advocate spending money on something until it becomes a problem. But at least you have some data here. Should you do a road project, you might want to think about a storm sewer improvement, perhaps. So once I talked about those 1 to 5 scoring of different sewer assets and wastewater assets. Once you have a scoring of condition, then you can take it a step further and assign a criticality or a priority to it. And so we have a numerical total criticality rating or BRE rating, business risk exposure rating. And this, if you could go back.
Go back.
Mickey Jo, please.
Yeah.
This isn't an end-all. We did talk to staff and city employees and use some judgment too, so it's not just strictly this is what the numbers show, it's also a common sense, the operators, the users of the system had contributions too, prior to going to a capital improvement. So we use these numeric numbers, we use staff experience to kind of combine those to a capital improvement plan. And actually the BRE also uses, so it takes 2 factors. It takes condition or probability of failure, how likely is it to fail or collapse, and it also takes consequence of failure. So if it's a really critical asset, absolutely necessary to operate the wastewater plant, it gets a higher score too. So we combine those two, we multiply them together to get a final score. How bad it is and how important it is. And then we get a final BRE score. So some of the wastewater plant too, we also include a redundancy factor. If you have 3 pumps and one of them is bad, well, you still have 2 there. So we also factor redundancy in. So I'm not going through that, but all those calculations are in that report. So that all shakes out to a capital improvement plan that we have up there. And my eyes are a little foggy from this distance, but I have the paper copy here. So we have, in bold, I bolded the ones that I thought were in the next 6 years as kind of the city's planning, near-term planning window. And then the other ones are farther out. This is a 20-year total plan, which is the ones, years 1 through 6 bolded. So some of the key items up there, I'm not going to go, we don't have time to go through the whole list there, but the ones that made, I think, the next 6 years are an electrical project is number 1 at the wastewater plant to replace the transfer switch, which switches from utility power to the generator power. And another electrical project is at the RBCs, kind of the fuse box, so to speak, of the RBCs is quite old, and it's certainly past its useful life. So we combine those into a single project. And then the second one on that list, grade 5 sewer defects, is, again, from all this televising we've done, we picked those very worst sewer conditions, and that would be worthy of a project to rehabilitate those. And then we have the East Belt in here twice, one north of Michigan Avenue, one south of Michigan Avenue. We've talked about that in the past. In a subsequent year, then, we've also included the grade 4 sewer defects. We just spaced them out in time to stretch the budget. The city could choose to combine those into a single project. One other project at the plant, what we call the raw sewage pumps, which are the influent pumps to the plant, are showing their age, and our analysis would predict that in the next, in this case, 2 or 3 years, it would be worthy of a project to improve those pumps. We put some manhole work down for 2022, those condition 4 and 5 manhole defects for 2022. And then at the bottom of the list, in this case it's on a second column, we put some annual projects, some smaller amounts that maybe the city should consider chipping away at, and you'll see our friend the RBC gearboxes are up there. We've talked a lot about those in the last month or two. I actually had this plan, this value in the plan for over a year now, waiting to present it to you. That I think it's a good idea just every year to be doing a little something with the RBCs. Also, the roofs and some doors at the wastewater plant have reached the end of their useful life, so putting some money into a program to rehabilitate the roofs and the doors is also bold on that list and has been included. An annual amount has been included. Many other projects are not on bold. Those are 7 years or more out, and we probably won't have time to go through those. The storm sewer CIP is there. Again, repairing those grade 5 sewer defects are up there. The grade 4 defects are up there. And then the grade 4 and 5 manholes are up there. I've separated them into distinct projects, but there's no reason, if it was more convenient to do them together, they could be done together. I have also included that McKay and Harris Street project, but again, I pushed those out at the time because I was not aware of any complaints or concerns necessarily about those. And as you do more TV work, more inspection in future years, I did put a placeholder for future defect work, future repairs, because we did not inspect every foot of pipe. We only could do a sample. So as you do more, you will find more. And I put a placeholder in for that. Nearing the end of this, when I take the 6-year wastewater CIP, I think it came out to be a little over $7 million, which is about $1.2 million a year. And I divided by the asset value that I shared at the beginning of the presentation. And it turns, that $1.2 million a year is about 2% of the value of the sewer and wastewater system. It just was a kind of a reality check to me. Is this a reasonable amount of CIP, reasonable amount of capital improvements? And if you think that a sewer nominally has a 100-year life, you would be putting about 1% a year into your sewer system, so that at the end of the 100 years, you replenished your system. Wastewater assets have a much shorter life. It's a much more aggressive environment. Things are moving. They probably only have a 20 or 30-year life on average. So in composite, I would expect a wastewater system to have about maybe 2 to 3% of their value in a CIP. So I thought the 1.2 was a reality check that's probably about right for the amount of infrastructure you have. Similarly, I did the same thing with the stormwater, and that only came out to be about 0.5% of the value of the stormwater system. So if anything, we might be a little light on the storm sewer. We might need to get more towards that 1% at some point in the future. That's it. That was just a gut check type of thing. The rate analysis. So we took this data and we updated your wastewater rate model. We met with Baird and Dickinson Wright about funding and financing and borrowing, and there are some loan costs built into these rates too. Some of these things you would borrow probably and do. And this, I believe, is very similar to what Ms. McDonough shared with you in April, because we coordinated that April presentation a little bit. I think it varied just a fraction of a percent due to maybe some updates we made to capital cost. I think we had the same projects, we just kind of fine-tuned some costs. And so that should look pretty similar to what we shared with you in the spring, of about a 6 to 7% annual increase to fund these bold projects that I showed you. Now, the stormwater, that's not funded through a rate system, it's through other budgets, so the state does not require any sort of a rate analysis, but since you did borrow from the plan, they expect you to make good progress towards implementing the plan through whatever mechanism you pay your storm sewer improvements through. One item that is nearing completion, it's not quite done, is something called a local limit study. So you have effluent limits at your wastewater plant. You can only discharge so much pollutant to the Saline River. A local limit study then takes those limits and kind of distributes them to the industrial customers you have in town. And you have an ordinance, sewer use ordinance, that has limits in it. The state asks you to keep updating that every 5 years or so. And so the grant allowed you to do that update. It's been quite a number of years since you've had that update done. Mr. Rogowski is gathering some final data that will allow us to finish that. But we think we know what some of the results are. As the city grows, you can give out less pollution to your industries. As you get closer and closer to your permit limit, the industries have to get closer and closer to the permit limit. So it looks like those limits in your sewer use ordinance are going to have to be lowered a little bit. And we've tried very hard, Steve and my staff have tried very hard to distribute those in such a way it has minimal impact on your industry. But it's important to know that those limits are going to have to come down a little bit. And we'll share that report with you when it's finished. We get that data back and we'll finish those calculations. So just a couple things left, just kind of a recap. We inspected, cleaned about 45,000 feet of sewer. We have those 1,243 manholes that we did that scanning on. All of the wastewater treatment plant components were inventoried and assessed. We did the computer models. And the other thing that I didn't have a slide for is all of this data has been stored in your GIS, the city's GIS. It will be available to you for generations. The city also purchased a piece of software that they call it a computerized maintenance management system, CMMS. It helps Steve and Jeff with their duties to generate work orders for repairs and keep track of all the work that's done. And that's called Lucity. That was the one that the city selected. So that is now available to city staff to use, keep records of all their maintenance and operations. That should be very helpful going forward as well. The grant will allow Steve and Jeff to purchase computers or tablet computers to be used in the office and in the field to access these records, to record their findings, and I believe they're in the process of procuring that. We've updated all new sewer mapping you have, updated with field data. It's the best I've ever seen Saline have. Those maps now are very accurate. You'll have that local limits evaluation in the next few weeks, I believe. A couple other items, I think, on the next slide. So we've documented all in this report. There are sections both for the plant and the 2 storm sewer systems. We have a first cut at your 20-year CIP. We've updated your sewer rate model, so it's good to go with next fiscal year. It's been all refreshed. And the city is required to report progress on the asset management plan annually to the state. It's both part of you're accepting your money and part of the permit, so you need to do it. We developed a template, kind of a fill-in-the-blank blank type of thing that I hope will be of value to the city, that at the end of the year, they can fill in what they've done and get a good grade from the DEQ, or Eagle now, so. I think I have summarized all of this in as concise a manner as I possibly can here. So,
Very good. Mr. Rubel, thank you. Mr. Wygowski, Superintendent Wygowski, DPW Director Fordyce, anything you'd like to add before we open it up for questions? Jeff?
No, I don't think I think Brian covered the whole thing pretty well.
Okay. Mr. Wygowski?
Yeah, I think Brian did a good job. As far as Lucidity, I made a commitment to Todd to try to populate those assets in the wastewater plant by the end of the year.
Very good. All right. All right, well, we'll start with questions. I always begin to my left, so let's start to my right this time. We'll begin with Councilwoman McClellan and end with Councilman Gearbaugh. And again, please speak into the microphone and make sure you state who your question is for. And again, to those who will be responding to questions, concerns from council members, also be sure to speak into the microphone. Councilwoman McClellan, the floor is yours.
Just a couple questions, actually, just one really. One of them is just a comment that I appreciate all the hard work and just the knowledge that your firm has about our city and our assets. I think it's pretty astounding. I appreciate you reviewing all that down for us too. Just one quick question about you said there was 9 miles that were televised. Is there an average age on that? Like, did we do newer, or is there a sampling?
Yes, the grant would not allow us to do anything built in the last 20 years.
Okay.
So
Good.
it makes sense, right?
Right.
Newer sewer is probably in pretty good shape. So I think the sampling is mostly older sewers.
Okay, good. That was, I think that's all I had. I think you answered most all the other stuff in your presentation, so thank you.
Very good. Councilwoman Dillon.
Thank you. I just want to piggyback on that quickly and ask, so when you determined, did you go by quadrants in the city? I mean, did you take major roads, side roads, subdivisions? I mean,
All of the above.
Okay.
It's a pretty wide sampling.
Okay.
Yep.
So, excuse me. So will the state require action on any items that were identified as like a 4 or 5? Like, now that we said, oh yeah, we're ranking this, like, do we have to like do something about it? And
That's an excellent question. They expect progress towards the implementation of the plan, is what their stated goal is. They don't expect perfection. They don't expect that things won't happen. One year you'll be tight budget and some things will be pushed off. Their stated goal is you need to keep this for 15 years, I think, and whenever they stop in, they expect it to be available for review, and they will just kind of track how you're doing. I think if you more or less accomplish this, you're in pretty good shape.
okay. So on the scale, you said most of our system is fair to excellent. What is fair?
I think it's defined in here. I don't remember exactly what it
Like
is.
a 3?
Yeah,
So
yes.
so it's like sort of like
Average. Yeah.
Okay.
I
'Cause
think
when I
that's-
heard fair, I was like, oh, that doesn't sound good.
I think average is correct, yes.
Okay. I wasn't sure whether that was next to worse.
Equivalent to its age, I would say, you know.
Okay. Now, this is on page 11. You talked about on sewer capacity. What was mentioned was it said largely unchanged. And I guess the time frame being, do you mean between
Yes.
2018 and when was that done?
I
Like-
changed very little from September of 2018 when I presented it to you for an hour that night.
Okay, so like in the 9-month period of time?
Almost 12 now, yeah.
Okay,
We had that pretty well wrapped up when we presented it last fall.
right, okay. And then I have some questions on these drawing things again, but I don't want to go too far off the weeds. I just want to make sure. So then, do we have in our capital improvements, are our sewer projects going to align with our road projects? Are they going to dictate the road projects?
It'll go both ways. Yeah, we've adjusted the street projects to match up with the identified sewer projects. And as Brian mentioned, in future years, if we have a street project where there's a storm sewer deficiency noted, we'll study that more in depth and decide if we need to do a storm project along with that road project. And that's our general approach when we're doing street projects, is to try to look at everything that's under that road and do it all at once.
Okay. And then, I guess my last question, so I want to make sure there's time for everybody else, is we talked about like more camera inspections. How would we go about doing it? Like, where would the funding, are there other grants? Like, can you get like the SAW grant part 2?
No, unfortunately, it was a one-time deal. At most of the communities most of the places I work do a small amount of camera work a year. It would not be uncommon to, and I think there's actually a proposed amount in here by year. It wouldn't be uncommon to do it on a 5 to 10 year cycle, that you inspect pretty much every foot of sewer in that time frame.
Okay.
But I think it would have to come out of your
It would just come.
capital, your
Okay.
your utility funds.
Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Very good, thank you, Councilwoman. Mayor Pro Tem Tar.
Thank you. Most of the questions that I had written down earlier were answered in the presentation, except for, I do have two. One of them was about the Central Belt. This is on 9012 of it's confirmed through additional monitoring analysis, Central Belt trunk sanitary sewage capacity does not meet Michigan Department of Eagle design standards. So does that mean more than simply we have red lines, like there's a design specification that we have to improve to, or does it, does it require remediation?
Yeah, the Eagles standard is a 3.9-inch storm. I know that's not what you asked about, but it's a very large storm that and essentially they don't want that storm as you get more and more water, the elevation rises in the sewer, and they would not want that elevation to reach a basement or flow out of a manhole and reach an environmental concern. I do not believe you would be under any kind of regulatory enforcement to do that until you have a new connection needed to that sewer, upon which then you would need to demonstrate that you meet that criterion. So that's where it would come in, is when you have new connections.
And in the meantime, if there were another project in that area, it would be assessed then based on what Jeff said earlier? Like changes could be made as part of other projects.
Right, yeah, if we had a street project in one of those areas, we would look more closely at the capacity issue and excuse me, see if there's something we could do along with that project. But as Brian said, the main driver would be if we are seeking to add additional connections to that line.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question is, I'm not, this is probably Jeff and Mr. Campbell. So in the CIP plan for the East Belt sewer improvements north and south, those are listed. Typically, we have a design phase in 1 year of a project and construction phase in another year. So I'm not sure who this question goes to. So how would those things break out on this list? Like the year is the year calendar year or fiscal year?
In that report, that's really sort of construction year, so straddling our fiscal years. So in our detailed citywide CIP, we have design funds in, I believe, the current fiscal year for the project in there that's listed as 2020. And then we have projected funds, design funds in fiscal 21 for the project that is constructed in 21.
Okay.
So in our city CIP, it is broken down in that standard fashion.
Okay. Mr. Campbell, the reason I ask about this is because of the urban county funding requests that we've been talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. Councilmember Seal.
Thank you very much for the, I think it's an excellent presentation you gave. It really
Quite welcome.
explained
My
to
pleasure,
me.
and I would be remiss if I didn't thank numerous people in this room other than myself, Mr. Campbell, Mr. Gowski, Mr. Fordyce. Ms. Bennett helped, as did Ms. McDonough. So.
Well, congratulations to all of you. I think it's a very good job. Just a general question. We've talked about the East Belt and the Central Belt. In a city of our, I guess, developmental stage, is there ever incorporation of a newer belt somewhere, say, in between the East and the Central Belt? Or is that impose too much digging?
I mean, installation of sewers is a pretty invasive process. I mean, there are directional drilling methods you can do to avoid surface disturbance. But when we've looked at expansion to the west, you know, that belt doesn't have any capacity to add additional connections in that direction. So, you know, when we're tossing around ideas, a whole new sewer coming into the plant, yeah, that's definitely part of the mix.
Okay. All right. That was just a general question. The other comment I wanted to make was one of the things that the mayor has allowed me to do is accompany him to SEMCOG meetings. And about a year ago at a general meeting, we had some breakout sessions. And I went to one about infrastructure. And I was very pleased even then, after having heard your report a year ago, to sit in the audience and realize how far ahead we are, I think, of a lot of other communities. Whether they just were ignorant of what was going on in their sewer department or whatever, I don't know. But I really felt proud of where we are and what we've done and how far we've gone down the path. So I just want to say again, congratulations, and I think it's a good job.
Thank you, Mr. Seal. Councilmember Gearwald.
I agree with all of our council members that I think this is the first time I've seen in all my years that we have a comprehensive understanding of where our sewer and conditions are and everything. I think one of the best parts of this is because of institutional knowledge and the loss of that as people are retiring and everything, this helps start setting a tone for us to at least understand where things are and at least maybe where we have to focus on. Just a couple things that I had a question about in terms of the updating of the software and maintaining it and some of the computers and all of that. I think I would like to understand, I mean, this may be for Mr. Campbell, what we need to do in terms of incorporating an annual budget, but also whether we need to have expertise or people come in to do that just to make sure that it's maintained. I would hate to see this type of a tool not continue to be updated on a regular basis, because that usually ends up being where, due to restrictions and shortness of staff and things, these things kind of get behind. And if we need to do that, I think that's one of the things that needs to be added to it. And then the other thing with this study, at least this gives us an idea right now if we weren't to move ahead and do much other changes, the siting study will help give us a lot more information in terms of what potentially we would move forward on. Because one of the items in here is the RBCs, and I know it lists in there about replacement and so forth, but I think we're at a time looking and assessing new technology and so forth. And then the other thing with just understanding our financing and so forth, I'm glad this had the rate study and so forth. I think where we may have had shortcomings is that we didn't adjust our rates sufficiently enough to replace and maintain this moving forward. And hopefully now that we've kind of got on that approach, it's kind of why I've been approached. My own opinion is to maintain the rate structure going forward so that we can keep up, not get behind. And I think this helps us, again, re-justify what we're doing, but also provide the information to our citizens who keep asking us, are we making decisions based on information? And now we have that information, and we are making decisions based on that. Thank you.
Well, I can't add much to that. I guess what I would offer, and I know this is kind of a glib throwaway phrase, but I use it quite frequently, is the value in making data-driven decisions. And as it relates to stormwater, as it relates to our sanitary sewer systems, and our infrastructure more broadly, I think that this council and city staff, working with consultants and some regional stakeholders, has done more work in recent years to assess where we're at and what we need to do moving forward. to maintain and to improve these vital services that our citizens and our businesses rely on. So you mentioned something, Mr. Rubel, in your opening remarks about the value of the SAW grant and how the state saw a deficiency that existed statewide, that municipalities weren't taking the time, nor did they have the financial resources to do this type of evaluation and analysis. So I'm so glad that we have done this. It's years overdue, but as Mr. Gearbaugh and others stated, this is data that will come in that will be very useful moving forward to assess our needs and to make improvements. So I think you did a fine job with the presentation. I'm glad that staff was able to contribute tangibly to this process. And we look forward to hearing more. And of course, we certainly look forward to having a more robust discussion about a siting study and other options relating to wastewater in the not too distant future. I guess what I would add is if folks have questions subsequent to tonight's meeting, please put those in writing to Mr. Campbell. He will refer them to the appropriate individual or individuals and get you the answers that you need. And then I would also request that you connect with Councilwoman Mitchell after tonight's meeting to offer to meet with her to discuss this issue and any other issues that come up during our regular meeting. Okay. Anything else? Gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. If there's nothing further to be brought up at this council work meeting, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn at 6:51 p.m. Moved by Gearbaugh. Was that second by Tahar?
Yes, it was.
Thank you, ma'am. All those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye. Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. This meeting is adjourned, and we will start our regular meeting promptly at 7.